this is that, it's, well, yeah, he starts in 1871. This instrument that you see here, this is actually the inside of my good fist that I took to my luthier. And this is when he cracked it open. It was major, major surgery. Major surgery. And so you can see, though, that we discovered that on the inside, every panel on the violin is actually signed by Fisk and has the number of the instrument and his signature and then the year that it was made. He would age all of his instruments for a year before he would actually let it out. So they would be built, and then they would be put in his shop, and then he would let it rest a year. So this is that instrument. And this is his shop here. So his shop was located at 714 12th Street in Greeley. Maybe you're all familiar with Greeley, but I'm assuming probably not. That is where now Phil's Pro Auto Shop is. So, yes, and this was his house, and then this was his shop that was on the same lot.
It's because the glue smells up the whole house.
And so, well, at the time, the glue was a little bit different than it is now. So it wasn't as potent as it is now, actually. So they used a different type of glue, which many luthiers now use a glue that is more synthetic. And the glue then, it did stink, but there were different levels to it. Most of them were made from horse, but some of them were actually made from different oils from instruments. It depends on what the maker was doing. And also you can see like the varnish is different on every single one of these. So yeah, there were a lot of different ways that people were putting them together, gluing them. The varnish would knock you out, honestly, though, I think. Linseed oil was used quite a bit, though. So George Fisk gets to Greeley and sets this up, and then something happens. We don't exactly know what happens, but we believe his wife has a near fatal accident on a river crossing, and he goes back to Hoosick Falls, New York, and he doesn't come back for 7 years. And then he comes back in 1876 with a different wife. We don't know. We don't know exactly what he was doing for those years, but that's still part of what I am working on to try and figure out what happened for those 7 years. And this is the violin, number 20, 1878, which you just heard, and this is the inside of that violin, the Maker's Mark. The Maker's Mark is quite a bit different than the one in the 1906 one. A violin, this is something that's really interesting, and if you can't see it from back there, this is a chair. Something really interesting about George Fisk is that he made instruments out of wood that he would find from different furniture that was discarded in the streets of Greeley. And why this is very interesting is because everybody was really rich in Greeley at the time, and the furniture that they had was of a very, very high quality, and a lot of it had come from Europe to New York because they immigrated, and then they came to Greeley, and they settled, and they brought this really fancy furniture, and it would get damaged along the way, and then they just threw it in the streets. And he would find those instruments, or those pieces of wood, and he would make them into instruments. So, let's see here, there's one here. Yeah, here it is. This is somebody is interviewing him for the paper, and he says, there was just a hint of pride in his voice, but not a great deal, for Fisk is a modest man and prefers working to talking as a rule. He stroked the brown and shining body of the violin he held on his knee and continued, I have wood here and there in the shop, and he waved a comprehensive hand about, indicating shelves near the ceiling with their precious burden, that I have had for 40 years. I am always looking for good old wood. Sometimes I find what I want in an old table that has been in a family attic for generations. Sometimes it is a dresser or perhaps a high-backed chair. It is not always easy to get just the piece I want for a particular instrument, but generally among my stores I find something that I can make do. So a lot of luthiers would consider these like what they call quilt pattern fiddles, because not all the wood matches, it's not all of the same thing. And so you can see, like, some people have this as an aesthetic where the seam doesn't match, but it's because he didn't have wood that actually matched. And the interesting thing about making wood out of, or violins out of furniture like that, is that the furniture could have been from anywhere in the world and could have been of any wood. And so we will be testing a few violins eventually to see exactly where the wood came from, but a lot of it probably came from similar old growth forests of other instruments that were made, like Guarneri or Strads, or other instruments that were made in the 1800s that were from other violin makers of the time. And so the wood is kind of like a huge question mark in the research that we're doing, because he would make it out of old discarded furniture. But we do know that it would have been more old growth forests that would have been in Italy and other places in Europe. Now this is the new information for those of you who have been to one of my other talks. This is a map of Greeley, Colorado in 1882. This is the year that Edward Remenyi came through Greeley, Colorado, and this is what Greeley looked like. Now, we have found on the map that George Fisk lived off of, right there, Linden, boom, right here. So this is off of basically Jefferson and Linden Street, and that would have been his house and shop, right there. So that's really cool, because this, this is one of the old maps that they created. It's you know, at the time, the city, it's not that big. It's not that big, but it has 3 opera houses in there, and like a million attorneys. And so, yeah, that's his house right there. So that's the really big discovery that the Weld County Genealogical Society just discovered within the past couple of weeks and sent me the information. And I just verified the information this morning. So this is brand spanking new. Perfect. Now, the reason 1882 is so important also with this map is because this is the year that Edward Remenyi comes through Greeley and gives a show in one of the opera houses. Edward Remenyi is the person who is credited for discovering Brahms, and he is also the person who is Franz Liszt's orchestrator and engraver. And so he's best friends with Franz Liszt. Him and Brahms, there's a whole story which I can't go into, but if you come to another lecture that's the full lecture, I do the entire story about Brahms and Remenyi. And essentially they busk around Europe for a while. Brahms pisses everyone off, and then he gets sent to Joachim, and the sad part is that the Hungarian dance suite that he writes is actually appropriation and an exact plagiarism from some of Remenyi's tunes that he wrote. So Hungarian Dance No. 7 is a direct rip from one of the pieces that Remenyi had written, and actually the book that I have here, which is Franz Liszt's book, is the book that actually is defending Hungarians and saying that Brahms, his Hungarian dances are a direct rip of their folk tunes, and that he gave no credit to them, and it all came from Remenyi because they were busking around for a while. Remenyi was also a product of war. When he was a young child, the Austro-Hungarian War breaks out, and he wants to go fight. And at the time, he had already been to the conservatory in Vienna and had already graduated, and he already had a Strad and was a world-famous violinist, but he wanted to go fight in the war. And so they allowed him to go fight in the war, but they said, you can't fight. You're actually going to be the aide-de-camp, which means you're the guy who plays at the campfire and makes sure all the military's feeling good. And he said, okay, I'll do that. Well, every battle, because at the time, now war is very different. Back then, it was kind of like school ground rules. We're going to meet here at this time, you bring your people, we bring our people, and then they fight it out. Remenyi would find out where the battle was and at what time, and he would sneak onto the battlefield an hour before the battle was even to start. And they actually, miraculously, he survives. And I'm sure from accounts, the military's not very happy. They're trying to save him because he's a national treasure to Hungary. If you know anything about history, Hungary loses that war. Austria wins that war. And so Remenyi is exiled from Eastern Europe. He is not allowed to be anywhere near the Austro-Hungarian Empire or anything that the Austrians have. And so he starts going around, and that's actually when he meets Brahms, and then he's allowed to go back to Austria at some point, and he's allowed to go back to Hungary, and he was friends with Liszt before that, and they started working together. Well, he comes to the United States partially because of that exile. He wasn't directly exiled during that time, but people weren't so happy about Hungarians coming around in Austria or going certain places after they just had a war and beat them. And so he comes to the United States, and he's already a world famous violinist, and everybody loves him, and he's friends with all the presidents. He stops at the White House every time he comes in. He goes on the vaudeville circuits across the United States. And the sad part about Remenyi is not only is he ripped off by Brahms, but he also comes to the United States, and he's really good friends with James Garfield and President McKinley, and he says, I don't understand how you have a whole nation and you don't have any single unifying music. You don't have a national anthem. The national anthem was actually not codified until 1931 by Congress in the United States. And so he said, how do you operate a country without a national anthem? And President Garfield actually said, you know what? You can write a national anthem for us. And he says, okay, I'll write a national anthem for you. And he even says, when we have a national orchestra, you can be the first chair of it. And so Remenyi writes a national anthem for us, and it's called Hymn to Liberty. And unfortunately, if you know our national anthem, that is not our national anthem. He doesn't make it in that. And not only that, but they never start a national orchestra while he's here. And then when they do, towards the end of his life, he's never called or written to be part of the orchestra. And so this is the piece that he wrote for the people of the United States, and this is called Hymn to Liberty, which he writes in a little bit after he meets George Fisk, actually, in 1883. And I'm going to actually show you this violin, which is much nicer.